Subcommittee will come to order. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing. Testifying before the subcommittee today is Mr. Brandon Lips, the Deputy Undersecretary for the Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Services. Thank you for being here, Mr. Lips. I'm looking forward to today's discussion. The Food Nutrition Service is the largest mission area at USDA. In terms of its budget size. In the FY 2020 appropriations bill that was passed by the House in June, the Food and Nutrition Services budget, including the mandatory and the discretionary resources, totaled more than $100 billion. FNS is responsible for overseeing 15 domestic nutrition assistance programs, which millions of our nation's most vulnerable population rely on to feed their children and to put a good, healthy meal on the table. I often say that the work of this subcommittee touches the lives of every citizen on a daily basis. This is especially true for the programs that are administered by the Food and Nutrition Service. In FY 20, nearly 6.4 million women, infants, and children are estimated to participate in the WIC program. For SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, the number is 38 million. And in 2020, an estimated 5.28 billion school lunches and snacks will be served through the National School Lunch Program. The research is clear. Providing and expanding access to healthy, nutritious food improves children's academics and their overall health. Food insecurity is not only a health issue, but it's also a national security issue. Fort Benning is in my district, and I often hear from the trainers there that bone density in the young recruits is not good because growing up they did not have enough nutritious food. And this lack of bone density causes an increased number of stress fractures during the training. And of course, this ultimately costs the Department of Defense and taxpayers a lot of money, and it limits the pool of potential all-volunteer recruits for our military. Unfortunately, I think there's a tendency by some to want to reflexively reduce the cost of programs without thinking about the individuals who will be harmed by such actions. That's why I was very alarmed when the administration proposed a rule that would essentially eliminate broad-based categorical eligibility, a move that could kick an estimated 3.1 million people off of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and jeopardize school meals for almost 1 million children. Congress had this debate during the Farm Bill. The final bill did not include these tightened eligibility criteria, nor did it include stricter work requirements for able-bodied adults without dependents. Yet the administration is ignoring Congress and instead moving forward with executive action to address these policies on their own. Now, it may be easy and politically expedient to point to one millionaire in Minnesota who purposefully defrauded the American government and taxpayers as a publicity stunt. But that one individual is not representative of all SNAP recipients, and we all know the truth is much more complicated than that. I, like everyone else, believes in program integrity. But let's be clear, USDA is not kicking 3.1 millionaires off of SNAP. It's kicking 3.1 million vulnerable people off of SNAP. I'm concerned and I worry that this will disproportionately impact working families with children trying to climb out of poverty. In 2017, SNAP lifted 3.4 million people, including 1.5 million children out of poverty. The economy is still not working for everyone, and the administration should not make it worse by decimating one of our most effective safety net programs. The Secretary's motto is do right and feed everyone. I like that saying, and I feel that it's a very, very worthy goal. But when children will go hungry because of your policy proposals, you're failing to live up to your own standard. Finally, I want to conclude with how alarmed and troubled I am at the constant stream of news articles about school districts shaming low-income students over their school lunch debt. It is unfathomable to me that anyone would shame and punish children for their parents' or their guardians' inability to afford school meals. Shaming students is not going to solve the problem, and it is certainly not going to make the youngsters feel more food secure. As you can tell, there's a lot to discuss today, and I again want to thank our witness, Deputy Undersecretary Lips, for being with us, and I look forward to our discussion. Before we begin, I want to say that I'm very proud of the Agriculture Appropriations Bill that was passed by the House in June. And I look forward to conferencing with the Senate this fall and enacting a very strong FY20 budget for the Food and Nutrition Service and all of USDA programs. Now I'd like to ask our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Fortenberry, if he has any opening remarks. Mr. Fortenberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, so much for holding this very important hearing, and I'll just make a few brief remarks. I think that most Americans would be very surprised by the size of the agricultural budget and very pleased, frankly, with the types of policies that have been enacted by this committee and by the entire Congress over the years to do really two things. It's to mitigate risk, to reduce the risk for farmers and ranchers and those who provide our food, which results in some of the lowest food prices in the world, and to protect those who are vulnerable, who have food insecurity. That's the dual goal that we work on here. I'm very proud of that. We spend a lot of money doing it. I think most Americans would be surprised by the amount of money we spend doing it. But when we go deeper and we peel back what we are doing and why, and the benefits to society as a whole, I think most Americans will be very proud of this work, as I am. Now, what we have to do, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, is to look at the issues of program integrity. And I think as a future goal for all of us in Congress, particularly this committee, is to look at the alignment, the possibilities of a new type of alignment between food and nutrition and health. That ought to be the objective, because the majority of the expenditures in this bill are for food and nutrition. The other programs, of course, being essential for our farmers and ranchers, but the majority of expenditures here are food and nutrition. And so in the old days, just counting calories, we want to just get people as many calories as possible, but ignoring the reality of what it means to have nutritious food, and also to view this program through the lens of how it is transitory. Some people need this type of assistance and are going to permanently need this type of assistance. Other people, and we have some good news in this regard, need it as a transition because for whatever happened, the contingencies in life happened to them, they became vulnerable, and we do not want to see anyone in America go hungry. The good news is, in the last several years, the SNAP program rolls have dropped by about 24%, as I understand it. That's because people are finding access to meaningful work. That is something to celebrate. So we've got a dual role here. Again, a program that protects people in vulnerable circumstances and also gives some people the opportunity to immediately rise out of that vulnerability into meaningful work. That's a bit of good news that we can all celebrate. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. Ms. Lips, without objection, your entire written testimony will be included in the record, and I recognize you now for your statement, and then we will proceed with questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Fortenberry, members of the subcommittee, for the opportunity to discuss the administration's fiscal year 2020 budget request for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition and Consumer Services, as well as our priorities and recent activities. I am Brandon Lips, the Deputy Undersecretary for Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Services. FNS is responsible for administering America's nutrition assistance programs, which leverage our nation's agricultural abundance to ensure that every American has access to a wholesome, nutritious diet, even when they face challenging circumstances. Let me underscore at the outset that the President's budget request for fiscal year 2020 fully funds the major nutrition assistance programs to support projected participation of all of those who are eligible and participate. As you know, you and your colleagues in the Senate have already reported out fiscal year 2020 appropriations legislation for the department in advance of today's hearing. Though final action by Congress is still ahead, I am in the somewhat unusual position of already being able to thank you for your support of several initiatives in our request, particularly those related to customer service and program integrity across the 15 programs that we administer at the Food and Nutrition Service. This committee has expressed interest in USDA's recent regulatory actions related to SNAP. While I cannot discuss the content of the final rules or the comments we have received on them before they are published, I would like to take a moment and talk about our objectives in this area. Americans, as you note, are a generous people who believe in helping those who have fallen on hard times. But we all agree that those who can provide for themselves should. SNAP and other programs are critical to millions of Americans, and we should be proud to have the abundance to come alongside them in these hard times. In order to do that, we have a responsibility to be good stewards of every dollar. For far too long, negative press has weakened Americans' confidence in many of these important programs that you have charged us with administering at the Food and Nutrition Service. Stories that are sometimes so egregious they appear surely to be only rumors are unfortunately verified as factual, jeopardizing the future of these important programs for millions of families. Let's first take a look at the millionaire that the chairman mentioned who was legally authorized for SNAP. He was not the only millionaire that has been mentioned in the news for being able to access the SNAP program. There are others as well who have created negative news stories on this important program. This loophole was first exposed by Congress on Oversight Authority, the General Accountability Office, in a 2012 report as having, quote, a negative effect on SNAP program integrity, as some states are designating SNAP applicants as categorically eligible without providing them the service required to make that determination," unquote. This loophole received greater scrutiny in 2015 by USDA's Office of Inspector General that described how one state conferred eligibility by providing recipients, quote, "with a brochure for social services," with the OIG further noting that the state only mailed the brochure to applicants after it conferred their eligibility for SNAP. This is not categorical eligibility. Next, let's look at families living across the state line from each other, just miles apart. We've learned that one family is receiving 2.5 times less in SNAP benefits simply because one state uses an inflated and inaccurate utility deduction. What begins as a series of observations from frontline staff at the Food and Nutrition Service about potential irregularities then became a full-blown USDA study initiated in 2014. We have since confirmed these irregularities because many states cannot cite the source of their base calculation for these deductions or the year in which they were established. This not only creates an uneven patchwork for the administration of a federal program, but it is morally unfair to those recipients. And finally, with the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years, we have employers across this country who cannot find enough workers. Yet states are continuing to waive the congressionally mandated work requirements by stating that 3.6% unemployment is a lack of sufficient jobs. Egregious program abuses such as these leave dark clouds over these important programs, risking future support and reflecting negatively on the recipients who are in need of these programs. Families on these programs and the taxpayers who fund them expect better from their government. We at USDA are dedicated to ensuring these important programs are preserved for those in need and that they are administered equitably, with integrity, and with the eligibility standards that Congress has provided. I remain committed to listening to and collaborating with all stakeholders, including each of you on this committee. Working together, we can improve the lives of those who fall on hard times and come in contact with these critical programs. Thank you for having me, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lips. As you heard from me earlier, I am very troubled by the administration's proposed broad-based categorical eligibility rule. The department's own analysis says that the rule will drop 9% of the current recipients from the rolls, including 13.2% of all households with one or more elderly person and 7.4% of all households with children. It admits that the rule may negatively impact food security among people who do not meet the proposed income and resource eligibility requirements. Your testimony frames this as a way to end the practice of allowing households to be eligible for SNAP by simply being handed a brochure from another federal program. You know as well as I do that this is a vast oversimplification of that issue. If you're applying for SNAP, you and your family are either teetering on the brink of food insecurity or you are already food insecure. Contrary to what I hear, I would argue that the broad-based categorical eligibility actually promotes the goals of all Americans, rewarding hard work and encouraging self-sufficiency. It allows states to protect recipients from being thrown off SNAP because of a minor increase in their pay. This rewards the working poor for working harder. It allows states to protect recipients who have very modest levels of savings. This promotes self-sufficiency, helping families to weather emergencies such as an unexpected car repair or some unexpected medical expenses. States still fully review each person's application. They interview the applicant. The applicant has to submit full documentation supporting the application. This is not an automatic green light to get SNAP, as you may seem to imply. Why is it that you insist that the current practice is inconsistent with these goals? And of course, one other concern is that the impact of that the proposed rule would have on the eligibility for free school meals. How many children will lose access to free school meals under the proposed rule?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, with regard to your first question about why we propose these, I will go back to your statement about this not being a simple issue. It is not a simple issue. The issues you raised are important issues that I think we can have important conversations about. The reality is that under the administration's proposal, categorical eligibility will be maintained in the form that it existed prior to the expansion of categorical eligibility to qualifying people by the receipt of a brochure. Unfortunately, that has moved to a level that it is a negative reflection on the program. It has been over time. It continues to be called out by oversight agencies of the Congress and the USDA as we move forward. Congress has provided asset and income tests in statute, and it is our job at USDA to ensure that those are abided by as we move forward on that front. So we put this role forward to work on the integrity of the program, to ensure that it is administered with the confidence of all of the American people as we move forward. And the issues you raised are important, and we would be happy to engage with you on those looking forward.
Okay, have you pulled back the rule temporarily as a result of some data that you learned that would increase the number of children that will be kicked off of the school lunch program?
We've not pulled back the rule, no, sir. The rule is advancing. The comment period has closed on the rule. We did release an analysis that was requested on the indirect effect on direct eligibility for school meals. We have shared that information publicly. It will be published in the Federal Register later this week, and we will have a comment period on that for 14 days, which will conclude the finality of comments on that rule.
Right. My time has expired. Mr. Fortenberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I think what we're talking about here is a fundamental value proposition of fairness. I think you mentioned, Mr. Lips, in your opening statement that Americans are quite generous. And we fundamentally believe that if someone is in a vulnerable circumstances, they deserve help. They deserve heart. And that's the core of this program. So we help those in need, and at the same time we stop those who cheat, and at the same time we encourage those who need opportunity. So when we struggle through that dynamic, you can pluck one or two incidences that were brought to you by the Inspector General. I think it needs to be pointed out. But what I'd like to use my time more so for, and we'll wrestle through where those lines are. But again, back to the point, when we have a flourishing economy, which when labor participation rates are going up, where people are finding access to meaningful work, this hopefully will begin to translate really soon into upward pressure on wages. So it's not the Commerce Department or the Labor's Department issue set, it's this issue set as well. How do we protect those most in need who may need to be permanently on this program? And we not only accept that, we embrace that as part of our safety net. How do we, through job training and other innovative ideas, potentially help those who can successfully transition off and celebrate this moment because the opportunity for meaningful work and hopefully rising wages soon is on the horizon? That's the architecture of the main question. The second question is, I want to go back to what I said earlier. You cannot have a food and nutrition program in isolation from concepts of health, food as medicine. And I think we are all learning very, very rapidly that a holistic approach to health demands that food be an integral part of the approach here. So would you comment on both of those, the prospects for both of those outcomes?
Sure. Thanks for that, Mr. Fortenberry. I will say one thing that I think all of us in this room can agree on and that we can rally behind is the employment and training program that Congress has authorized for the SNAP program. We got a small increase in that in the Farm Bill. The agency has taken a number of actions prior to my arrival and since my arrival to focus our efforts on that front. It is a good time in this economy for people to move back into work and for them to find economic mobility on that front.
I'd say meaningful work. It's very important that we make a distinction here. Not just labor force participation, that's impersonal. Meaningful work. So people have real opportunity to advance.
That's right. Let me talk about that for a minute.
And that's been one of the structural constraints that don't allow people to move forward.
Right. With regard to the employment training program, the agency has taken a very specific focus in ensuring that individuals are moved into the type of an employment training that moves them into meaningful work, that we're not just putting them at job search. That may be an important component of what they're doing. But I have had the great pleasure in my job of going around and seeing these individuals participating in an employment and training program and hearing the stories of formerly incarcerated individuals who were estranged from their families going through these training programs and learning not only a particular skill set that gets them meaningful work, but the basics of being able to hold on and to keep a job and being reunited with their family that they're then providing for. I have the opportunity to meet those people. Employment and training is doing that. It's a wonderful program that Congress has funded and provided us some additional money in the Farm Bill.
Are
Continue.
your successes manifesting themselves in aggregate statistics versus anecdotes yet?
I think we're on the verge of that happening. In some states, we see that happen. One of the initiatives that y'all provided some funds for in the appropriations bill was one of the problems that states have in advancing this program is tracking this and being able to report what's required to receive these federal dollars. So y'all provided some money for us to be able to help states with the IT on that side.
Okay, let's come back to that perhaps later, but talk again about the alignment of food, nutrition, and health and what you are doing in terms of policy planning in this regard.
Sure. That starts at FNS with our youngest population in WIC. We all know there's a lot of data out there that if the youngest of these children don't get the nutrition they need at that early age, there's no way to correct that. Later in the life, some of that can be corrected, but not on WIC. And so we look at that as a across the lifespan perspective, both as we produce the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, but also as we look at our programs and ensuring that that nutrition is had
Okay,
from their
as one of the early founders of the Farm to School program and movement, again, you can see what we're trying to do. Provide nutritious, fresh options, enculturating it, socializing it, and creating actually the infrastructure that makes it possible for this type of linkage to occur in an ongoing fashion in the future. That's one of the program areas I think we need to build on to accomplish this goal of nutritious food.
Anecdotally, Farm to School is having great success on children's health.
Ms. Pingree.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lips, for being with us today. I just want to start by echoing the chairs, and I'm sure some of my other colleagues feel the same way, having these significant concerns about the suite of the USDA's proposed rules that will negatively impact SNAP participation. Last month, a bipartisan delegation from my state sent a letter to the USDA expressing our opposition to the proposed rule on categorical eligibility. According to USDA's own estimate, 7 states, including Maine, would see more than 15% of SNAP households lose eligibility if that rule moves forward. The Maine Department of Health and Human Services found that nearly 27% of all SNAP participants in our state are at risk of losing benefits under the proposed rule. In the delegation's letter, we wrote, for a state like Maine that is already struggling with food insecurity, these changes would be detrimental to the very population the program is designed to support. I just want to reemphasize that point. We're just talking about food here. I believe that everyone has the right to healthy and nutritious food, so these SNAP proposed rules are just unconscionable to me. They're only going to worsen the hunger in Maine's most vulnerable populations. Having anyone go hungry is inexcusable in the world's wealthiest nation. I think you should rescind all of these proposals. I'm appalled that we even have to have this hearing and defend this to this USDA and the administration. Congress already spoke about what we thought we should do, and it's appalling that you're trying to reverse that. But I'm going to leave it there, move on, because I'm pretty sure you and I are not going to agree on this, and you're going to move forward, but we're going to do whatever we can. So completely on a different topic, but also about food and hunger. I'm also a big believer that food is medicine, as the ranking member mentioned, and I want to switch gears and talk about the consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. Sugar-sweetened beverages have been causally linked to obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and dental decay. The healthcare costs associated with diet-related diseases is an incredible burden to our country, and these diet-related diseases are especially prevalent in our youth population, robs many of our young people of the with the healthy future they deserve. I know everybody is familiar with the My Plate and how it informs programs like the National School Lunch Program. But if you look at this, something you don't see in here is a glass of water. 1 in 5 United States youth and young adults did not drink any water yesterday. We need to encourage kids to drink more water. It's essential for their good health, and it also helps reduce the intake of sugar-sweetened beverages. So what actions are the USDA taking to better encourage water consumption in our younger populations, whether that's National School Lunch Program, WIC, or the Child and Adult Care Food Program? And beyond the access to water, what is USDA doing to make sure that that water is safe?
Sure, Ms. Pingree, agree with you about those statements on the importance of the Dietary Guidelines and the concerns that you mentioned around sugar-sweetened beverages. As you know, the school meals program has specific requirements with regard to added sugars within the school meals program and what can be sold in schools even outside the school meals program on that front. With regard to the scientific evidence that supported DGACs in the past, I think you know the importance of the milk being on my plate. Water is important. We give a lot of technical assistance and advice to schools on ensuring that children are drinking water and staying hydrated in addition to the milk. That's an important part of the dietary guidelines. And our WIC nutritionists do work across that front as well.
Would you send me more information about what kind of technical assistance you provide? Also, what you're doing to make sure that water is safe in schools and other places where children would be drinking it?
Sure.
Okay. I'll leave it with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Gentlelady from California, Ms. Lee.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this hearing. I'm glad to get to know you. And I want to just say a couple of things associating myself with the remarks of my colleagues already. The cases you cited early on, I'm not an attorney by profession. I'm a clinical social worker, but I do know that law students are taught that worst case makes bad law. And so you cited maybe 3-5% of the worst cases to justify many of these very terrible, terrible policies that you're putting forward. USDA has issued the 3 proposed rules to SNAP. Now, I also have to say that I'm a former food stamp recipient. So personally, I'm deeply disturbed by these proposals because I know what this means for people who are living on the edge. 750,000 people will lose their SNAP benefits on the work requirements. I think 3.1 million people, that's including by your own analysis released yesterday, it's 1 million children will lose automatic access to free school meals, even worse than we feared. And most recently, as of this month, 800,000 households would lose SNAP eligibility under the standard utility allowance. Yesterday, I received a copy of your response to my letter with Majority Leader Steny Hoyer opposing the SNAP categorical eligibility rule, which I find to be incredibly lacking in substance. You mention in your response in the letter that these revisions will, and I'll quote, maintain categorical eligibility's dual purpose of streamlining program administration while ensuring that SNAP benefits are provided to those most in need. So, Mr. Lips, exactly how would you maintain these provisions if you're taking away assistance from 3.1 million individuals, including 1 million children by your own analysis, and taking important, quote, states' rights away? Has USDA done an impact analysis of the administrative burden that this would actually place on states? Also, let me just ask you, because I want to complete my questions, share with the committee clear evidence that cutting people off of food benefits removes barriers to work. How does this really help them find a job? Actually, 50-60% of people who are eligible for SNAP benefits are working. They're working 2 and 3 jobs because they can't afford to survive with the economy being what it is. And you mentioned formerly incarcerated individuals, and I'm wondering, are you helpful in being supportive of the several programs that are circulating, several policies and legislation to lift the ban on SNAP benefits, which was put into place, which prevent formerly incarcerated individuals from accessing SNAP benefits?
Thanks, Representative. First, with regard to categorical eligibility, I do want to clarify that the rule the administration is proposing is refining categorical eligibility. So with regard to broad-based categorical eligibility, we're returning to categorical eligibility as it was originally implemented. Categorical eligibility is generally implemented in such that a program with the same eligibility standards or more restrictive eligibility standards confers eligibility on programs that have broader eligibility standards to ensure that people can get around having to fill out multiple applications to access those programs. We have an instance now where programs who are not making an eligibility determination but are handing out brochures or conferring eligibility for other programs, which is causing the negative news stories on this program that we see over and over. Even under the rule as it was proposed, and we're considering the comments now, individuals who qualify for TANF services, as they did when categorical eligibility was initiated, will continue to qualify for SNAP. And that dual purpose will be maintained, ensuring that both we have integrity, but that individuals continue to have categorical eligibility for both TANF and SNAP. With regard to your question on the impact for burden on states, I tried to write down all your questions, but if I missed some, I'm sure you'll remind me. Impact with burden on states, there is an analysis of that in the regulatory impact analysis that accompanies the rule. We can follow up with you on those exact numbers. I don't have them offhand. Certainly, when states conduct an actual eligibility determination, there is an additional step and there is some required assessment for the states to put them in the program. But again, we believe per this rule that it is an important step to ensure that individuals are eligible for the program benefits that they're receiving, and that's a protection as much for the people on the program as it is for the tax dollars as well.
Formerly incarcerated individuals' eligibility for SNAP benefits.
I'm not familiar with the particular proposals with which you refer, but the agency does work with states on this. There are some that are working, that have received waivers to sign people up for SNAP prior to their release from prison to ensure that they have those supports as they come out, and we've issued some waivers on that front and are generally supportive of those type policies.
I don't understand then why, by your own analysis, 1 million children are going to lose their automatic benefits to free meals based on your presentation. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Ms. McCullum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm assuming we'll have an opportunity for 2 questions, so I'll just stick to my first one here. Taking you back to what happened during the shutdown and looking at 2018, the Farm Bill authorized a new program that allowed tribal organizations to enter into self-determination contracts to oversee food distribution on Indian reservations, promoting tribal sovereignty and helping to meet specific tribal and cultural needs. The committee included $3 million for this demonstration project, and the demonstration project ran into a huge problem because you didn't have a program that you'd worked with the tribes for contingency of a planned shutdown. So this left families that were already vulnerable to food shortages facing additional uncertainty. So can you please provide us any update on any consultations that you've had with tribal organizations, what USDA has put in progress to implement the new demonstration project in general, but any safeguards you would have during a shutdown. And Mr. Chair, I have with me, was submitted to another committee, testimony from Mary Green Trotter from the Spirit Lake Nation, president of the National Association of Food Distribution Programs on Indian Reservations. Another issue that they had on tribal reservations were the best used by dates. And when best used by dates for delivery of food that wasn't given to the tribes wasn't met, the food was donated to food shelves rather than the buffalo meat go to the tribes. Could you just fill in here what's going on with tribal consultation and how this will never happen again in the future?
Sure. Thank you, Representative. First, with regard to the shutdown, we all acknowledge that those are very difficult times, particularly in programs that ensure that individuals have access to food. Wasn't a time that any of us enjoyed. You are right about the difficulties that the tribes have raised with the concern over having access to food during that time. I don't believe that we resulted in any actual issues with being able to get food out this round. There was an issue in the past that has caused great concern for the tribes for right reasons, and we continue to work with them on that.
Excuse me, sir, when you said food this round, are you talking about the current shutdown?
Yes, ma'am.
The last shutdown?
During the shutdown.
Well, there were federal facilities controlled by the USDA that were locked on tribal reservations, and the tribes couldn't even get the food out themselves when they offered to remove food from there, and I have this in the testimony. So I don't know what you're referring to.
I'm not aware of that issue, Representative. We'll look into that and get back with you on that answer. I was not aware that became an issue for FDIPR during the most recent shutdown, but we'll look into that and get back with you on an answer on that. I will say, with regard to self-determination, which the tribes do believe will help solve this and other issues for them, we are excited to work with the tribes on this self-determination pilot, and to hopefully prove success for them on that front. I believe I've had personally 7 consultations with the tribes in my 2 years at Food and Nutrition Service, and we're working very hard on that relationship to make sure that we understand their needs and that we're listening and being attentive to those. Ms. Trottier is at most of those consultations, and we've had great discussions on that front. Unfortunately, we can't take significant action on the self-determination project until it is funded because it was authorized, and we're prohibited from doing that, but we're excited to see that money in the appropriations bill, and did start discussing that specifically with the tribes at the last consultation.
I have another question, but I don't have enough time in this round, so I will yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Mr. Lips, I want to take a moment to focus on Puerto Rico. In 2017, in wake of Hurricane Maria, Congress made available an additional $1.27 billion in Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program funding for Puerto Rico. Then in June, Congress provided another $600 million. Unlike states, Puerto Rico is uniquely dependent on Congress for funds in the event of an emergency or a natural disaster. Even with these additional benefits, Puerto Rican households barely manage to receive comparable benefits as compared to the households in the 50 states. Given that fact, the continued recovery from Hurricane Maria and the high level of poverty in Puerto Rico, what are your specific recommendations for reducing food insecurity in Puerto Rico?
Thanks for that question, Mr. Chairman. We at FNS do a lot of work with Puerto Rico on that front. We have 5 staff permanently on the ground in Puerto Rico who work with them on regular occasion, and we provide a lot of technical assistance and advice in carrying out the NAP program, which Congress has funded for them, to help ensure that that works, and WIC and our other programs that operate across Puerto Rico. As you noted, they are not authorized in the SNAP program. They have a NAP grant, which operates differently than the SNAP program, and so we do everything that we can to help them within the confines of what Congress has provided for them.
Okay, let me switch gears and talk about the Food Purchase and Distribution Program. This summer, USDA announced the details for a second farmer relief package in response to the ongoing trade war. The Market Facilitation Program, which accounts for most of the money, is understandably getting the most attention. However, the Food Purchase and Distribution Program is to receive $1.4 billion for the purchase and distribution of surplus commodities that were affected by trade disruptions. In FY19, in the FY19 bill, in response to the first farmer assistance package, which provided $1.2 billion for the Food Purchase and Distribution Program, Congress provided nearly $110 million for the TFAP administration. This included a one-time $30 million transfer from some unobligated balances to help manage all of the product that was being purchased and flowing into the food banks. Did FNS utilize all of that $110 million? And now that there's a second round, what are the resources that are needed for this fiscal year, and what are you hearing from the food banks?
Sure. Thanks for that question, Mr. Chairman. We will get back with you on an exact number on that $110 million. I expect that we used most, if not all of it, as we were very successful in the partnership with food banks and schools and tribes and others on moving out funds, moving out food on that first round of the food distribution program related to mitigation. And as we move into the second round, we have been in conversation with food banks about their needs in this round. The first round ensured that we had a specific amount of money that we said followed the truck to ensure that that money made it to the end location for whoever was delivering that food had the resources that they need to get it out. We're working with food banks to figure out what that right number is and make sure that they have the resources to help us deliver that food to folks in need.
Okay. As I indicated, Mr. Lips, in my opening statement, I'm increasingly alarmed by the reports of schools publicly shaming children over their school lunch debt. No person, let alone a child, should be subject to that type of ridicule and embarrassment. What tools does FNS have in place that can be used to address this problem, and do you need more authorities from Congress?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. One of the more important questions I think that we discuss on this front is certainly lunch shaming. Obviously, we all know that the overwhelming majority of schools do a great job administering the program. There have been too many news stories for sure about children who have been the subject of lunch shaming, and we need to do all that we can on that front. The agency has taken a number of steps over the years to work on that, and I believe has taken all of the action that we feel we can at this point. The most significant being that schools have to have a policy for unpaid lunch debt. They have to communicate that with their workers, and they have to communicate that with the parents so that everybody understands. And there is a prohibition about identifying children in the free or reduced price program. So to the extent that they are reduced price students being identified, there's already a prohibition against that. But it's an important, difficult subject we talk to schools about regularly, and I think it's an important issue on which USDA will engage on technical assistance as Congress looks at reauthorizing child nutrition.
Thank you, Mr. Lips. Mr. Fortenberry.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's return to the Farm to School program. I'd like to hear your analysis of the success of the program and any challenges that you're facing. Again, I think this is exciting at many levels, introducing local food, nutritious foods into the diets of young people, creating that linkage back to farmer to family, rural to urban. It has a lot of levels of social meaning beyond just the nutritional outcomes. So talk about the implementation of the program. I have the basic statistics, 3.2 million students served, but the possibilities for further expansion as well as any problems you're encountering. And let's do that for 1 minute, and I'm going to turn to a couple of other things.
Sure. Mr. Fortenberry, it's another wonderful thing I get to see out on the road is Farm to School program, and I've seen anecdotally when you talk to the kids participating in those programs, it's inspiring them not only to better health as they talk about new fruits and vegetables they've tried and those that they now continue to eat.
And it is amazing how the nutritionists in schools know how to place certain foods that create a, I guess, psychological preference. I've learned this too.
They do a wonderful job, and you can see it at really about any of those locations. But also, it inspires in those kids. Talking to kids who come from low-income families about aspirations to be botanists and careers in agriculture and different types of things. So the success across the front on Farm to School, and I think that it's having anecdotally a greater effect on schools, on children's healthy choices, being able to participate in that than any of the programs that we run. So we're very excited about that. The additional money that Congress has provided, the $5 million the last 2 years has really helped expand that program. One request that we do have from the agency in the President's budget is that the limit of $100,000 be able to be moved up to $500,000. That will allow schools to operate programs have funds to operate those programs over a longer term as they get them established, but also as you look at some of your larger school districts to have projects that can serve districts.
Mr. Chairman, maybe we could make note of that. I think that's an important point that was just made. So as we work on the next bill, I think that's a good point. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Secondly, well, let me wrap this up by saying, again, there is a tendency in government to define our activities around the lanes in which they've traditionally been defined, which met a type of need sometime in the past. So it's easier to be confined to what is than to think about what could be. And again, this alignment of food, nutrition, and health is absolutely critical if we are going to take a holistic approach to the ecosystem of livability for persons, which fundamentally centers around health and nutrition, food, as well as the possibilities of, in constrained budget times, moving across sectors to improve outcomes while reducing cost. And third, resocializing concepts which used to be the norm. Again, the farmer connected to the family, the rural-urban integration, which we've lost. The next iteration of this, I'll talk to you about at some point, Mr. Chairman, is the idea of agricultural programs either revitalized or embedded in schools. Why in the world botany can't be about growing things at school that then get fed to kids? We're exploring this back home. That's mostly local issues, but there's a federal role here as well. There is I'm going to divert for a moment to a recent study that in the Annals of Internal Medicine that says that red meat consumption may very well be okay after all. Now, I come from cattle country, as you're quite aware, and this is important to us because when we're talking about the multitude of studies and information that comes at people, at some point in time, one thing's bad, then suddenly it's good. Now, are you familiar with this study, and will the new dietary guidelines look at animal protein consumption as an important part of that guideline versus heavy carbohydrates?
Yes, sir. Again, appreciate that question. As y'all know, we're in the middle of the dietary guidelines process. The advisory committee is reviewing the evidence now. One of the problems that we have with Americans' health is that we hear these different headlines all the time. Today something's good, tomorrow it's bad. Americans don't know what to do with that. The dietary guidelines process should help clear that out for everyone, and that's what the process is designed to do. So they will consider issues such as these as they consider the dietary patterns of Americans and what the research shows on that front. And all of the evidence that was considered in that recent headline is available for consideration per the committee. They will set their own protocol for the systematic reviews that they will review, but they're not excluding any of that evidence.
The same thing could be said for whole milk or 2% milk, that the rates of obesity took off prior to when there were higher levels. After there were higher levels of actual high levels of consumption of whole milk and 2% milk. This is another thing that I think that needs to be reexamined that has possibly gotten confused over the last few years.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Pingree.
Thank you very much. And I do want to echo the remarks of the ranking member on this. I agree on the great value in farm to school. It's all the things you said. Kids benefit from having more interaction with local farms. It's good for the rural economy and increasingly the interest in school gardens, more school food preparation the kids are engaged in, education around agriculture and gardening, all very good things, and I think really engage kids in that. And I've seen a lot of examples of it visiting school lunch programs where kids, think every carrot is the one that they grew, think kale is actually tasty now, lots of great things. And I hear it from parents, too, who say, my kids came home and told me about a vegetable we don't normally eat. So anyway, I think that's all very good, and I encourage even more of it. I want to just ask a quick question on food waste reduction. I'm very interested in that. Something like 30% of the food in this country is wasted. That's an environmental issue. It's a huge challenge when so many people are going hungry and don't have access to healthy food, and we need to do a lot more to fix the problem. I am a co-chair of the Food Recovery Caucus with Mr. Newhouse, and we've been looking for ways to reduce food waste all across the supply chain. I know there have been a lot of concerns about food waste in schools, sometimes just because kids don't have enough time to eat their meal. Waste audits can help schools better understand waste in schools, what's being wasted, how much is being wasted, and why. This information can be really valuable in changing the behavior or identifying opportunities to reduce waste. Does FNS provide schools with any resources or technical assistance to the schools so that they can conduct waste audits?
Representative, I'm not sure we do specifically with regard to waste audits, but I know that we give a lot of technical assistance on that front. We can get you a list of what those things are, and certainly the Secretary's made food waste a priority. We're looking at more opportunities to help schools with that now, and I agree with you that it's an important issue that we can address together.
Great. Well, let's be in touch with this. I agree that the Secretary has been very supportive on this and worked on it, and certainly has some serious goals about reducing food waste, but we have to move faster. We have to confront it on all fronts. So I hope we can continue to discuss that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, I'd like to bring up, when you raised this in your opening statement, the issue around lunch shamming and what's taking place right now, because far too many children find themselves humiliated and ashamed in classrooms for owing money for school lunches. What's worse, many of these children are forced to go hungry for unpaid school meals, which is just plain wrong. Unfortunately, and this is according to the School Nutrition Association, it's not an uncommon issue. 3/4 of school districts have unpaid the student meal debt, and we don't even know how many students are being turned away because of this very shameful policy. Now, in California, just this last Saturday, Governor Newsom signed into law a measure banning this practice for all K through 12 school children. In my own district, where the school meal program, and let me remind you that the school breakfast program was actually started by the Black Panther Party. In my district, they banned this practice for over a decade at both the Oakland and Berkeley schools. So I'm wondering what the administration is doing to address lunch shamming with the national policy to end it, and if so, when you're going to do this and how are you going to do it, and also how we're going to ensure that schools communicate to parents and families who have outstanding debt that they're not going to sham the students and pressure them to collect this debt.
Sure. Again, Representative Lee, I agree this is a very important issue and one that we all need to be working carefully on. The agency has, first let me say statutorily that schools may not overtly identify low-income participants in the school meals program. So there is a statutory requirement on that front. With regard to lunch shaming generally, the agency has held a number of roundtables and sessions with schools to talk about this issue and the complications with which to resolving this issue, both with regard to their debt and ensuring that children have access to food and that they're not shamed. The agency requires that every school district have a policy on unpaid school lunch debt and that they communicate that policy to all of their workers and to all of their parents so that everyone is of the understanding on how these communications will happen and that the communication should happen with the parents and not with the children. So FNS has put that out and is working with states and school districts to ensure that it's enforced.
Do you provide oversight for that to make sure that it is enforced?
Yes, ma'am. We check, the states do, but we provide oversight to the states to ensure that it's enforced with regard to that policy. We believe that that is the extent. We continue to work on technical assistance and resources for schools on how to deal with these issues, but with that, we believe that that's as far as the agency can go, and we do stand ready to provide technical assistance to anybody who's ready to look at that issue, particularly as
Okay,
child
I'd like to
nutrition
follow up with you
reauthorization
because I think
comes
we need some more sticks
Okay.
On this policy. Let me ask you one more question. With regard to just some information I've received from my Alameda County Food Bank, which serves my congressional district, they have informed me that the shutdown earlier this year has had a long-lasting impact on hunger. And so I'm wondering if USDA has done anything to help food banks catch up with this unexpected hit on their food supplies, which came right after, of course, the holiday season was ending. And are you responding to this issue in a way to really try to stop this increase in hunger because of the unfortunate decisions that had been made by the president?
Ms. Lee, again, I would acknowledge that shutdowns are difficult in all programs, particularly in those that provide food, and there are difficult issues in those that are hard for everyone to work through. We worked with all of our programs, FDIPR, TFAP, to do the best we could to ensure that food got out to those folks in need. We have worked to ensure that food banks are receiving all of their shipments that are due to them to make sure they have the food that's expected. And also, I do think that the food that we've been able to provide through the trade mitigation program has been a great opportunity for food banks to receive additional support to help those in need.
Okay, but I think the issue is the longer-lasting impact now on hunger. We're going to have to catch up now, and we're going to have to do more to make sure food security doesn't become even a larger problem in this country as a result directly from the shutdown. So we're going to have to come up with new ideas to mitigate against this long term. Thank you very much.
Ms. McCollum?
Thank you. I want to go back to the broad-based categorical eligibility rule. And I'm going to use Minnesota as an example so that, we can have it in bite-sized pieces, so to speak. The flexibility to raise SNAP income guideline from 130% of federal poverty, and I'm going to put it in real household numbers for a family of three, that's $27,000. To the federal poverty guideline of 165. That's for a family of three. For a family of three in the Twin Cities, where we're having huge problems with people being able to afford housing, shelter right now, $34,000. So we're not talking about a lot of money for families. So these are not wealthy families, and as my colleague from California pointed out, sometimes they are already working, sometimes 1 or 2 jobs while they're taking care of their children. Minnesota adopted this policy for the flexibility to raise the SNAP income guidelines in 2010, and it helped streamline our state's management for delivery of SNAP. It increased access to basic food assistance to low-income families. On September 6th, a letter from the Commissioner of Minnesota's Department of Human Services went to the office, your office, about this proposed rule, and I read from it, quote, apart from increasing hunger and reducing poverty efficiency, this proposed rule would leave Minnesota's vulnerable during an economic crisis. Right now, our economy's good, but it takes away that immediate flexibility for a state to respond when there's an economic downturn, whether it's in the state, regionally, or nationally. And your mission on your homepage is, and I quote, our mission is to increase food security and to reduce hunger by providing food to low-income people across with access. So under this rule, our state has proposed that up to 350,000 Minnesotans, nearly 70% of these people are children, seniors, and adults with disabilities, would lose their SNAP benefits. So we've done a deep dive into who this is going to affect: children, seniors, and adults with disabilities. And I'm going to take the adults with disabilities one step farther and then let you respond in general. Under current law, in order to receive more than 3 months of SNAP benefits in a 3-year time period, a group of adults must either be employed or enrolled in officially organized employment training for 20 hours a week. That's current law. 3 months of SNAP benefits, 3-year time program. You must be employed or officially recognized employment for 20 hours. States like Minnesota currently have flexibility to waive these time limits in certain geographic areas. We have very rural parts of the district, we have very dense parts, we have labor intensive, we have farming, we have mining. So we have a very dispersed employment. So we like to have the flexibility for our state to be resilient in a time of process. So your rule would limit the existing criteria for granting SNAP waivers, causing many Minnesotans, simply by where they live, to be at great risk of losing their SNAP benefits. So here again, March 29th, the Commissioner of Minnesota Department of Human Services said that if the state's rule were to go in effect, workers, and I quote, would be forced to find jobs that are not available to enroll in our employment services that simply don't exist. So what are you going to do as you go back and look at this for these public comments for seniors, for children, and for people working with disabilities?
Sure. Representative, first of all, we're going to consider all those comments. We're required to do so and will do so, and we will review those comments and respond to each of them as we proceed with the final rule. With regard to the ABOD rule, which you mentioned last, states will still have flexibility. The rule just ensures that states are not exempting counties of 3.5% unemployment from the work requirement that Congress imposed. States also retain a 12% exemption that they can use for any of their population, particularly for those in rural areas or particular areas where there may be a pronounced effect that's not under a waiver. So there is flexibility maintained in that. We're just ensuring that the work requirement that Congress put in statute is enforced as we move forward. And with regard to broad-based categorical eligibility, I think that there is an important discussion about what the right asset and income standards are. We are ensuring that what Congress has provided in statute for the families we serve is abided by. And there's an important intersection of other federal programs that work to support those things. And there's always a great discussion to be had about how we can better support families in those intersections. And certainly we would be willing to provide technical assistance on any of those fronts.
Mr. Lips, it's been almost a decade since Congress authorized what has become known as the Summer EBT program. The evaluation of this program has been rigorous, and the findings unambiguous, that the results of the Summer EBT demonstration are clear that the program is feasible and the impacts on food security and children's nutrition are positive and substantial. Despite the successful results and the fact that summer months can be some of the most uncertain times for children that are facing food insecurity, last year USDA changed its approach to focus on new projects that will test, quote, innovative strategies. The request for applications also stated that the projects will be competitively selected. Over the summer, FNS published a blog by you detailing a collaboration between USDA and Baylor University to demonstrate a summer meals project. Will you describe this project in Texas and tell us whether it was competitively selected, how the funding was approved, and is this an attempt to pilot the Harvest Box program, which received such strong opposition here in this committee and in the authorizing committee?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, that was not an attempt to pilot the Harvest Box program. That was an attempt to solve an issue that Congress has asked us to work on in a number of appropriations bills, and for which we have not found a solution, which is rural and frontier hunger in the summer meals program. That was funded, we funded under a competitive process. I think y'all are aware that this program, Summer EBT, as it has become known, is a demonstration project that's been running for a number of years. And we have great data on that. You're correct, and we've reported that back to Congress, and we continue to fund those pilots for a number of states while leaving the rest of the states without having a discussion about that. And so we at USDA decided that we should start testing new methodologies as we move forward to provide Congress more information so we can make a decision, so that Congress can make a decision with our technical assistance on how best to move forward in solving summer hunger, which we all agree is an issue. This proposal came to us with an opportunity to provide food to those in rural and frontier communities and an opportunity to solve that problem. We think that it had an opportunity to meet a number of those needs, and we have proceeded forward on that front. It's going to have an evaluation run by the Urban Institute that's going to tell us how that worked. And anecdotally, we got very great reviews from the participants in the program and the schools that participated in that, a school which also runs the summer feeding program, I might add. But they note that this is a separate issue that hasn't been solved and for which everybody talks about, but we haven't seen any solutions. And so we're excited to see if the data shows what we're seeing anecdotally, that this may be an opportunity not to change the summer meals program overall, but particularly for those rural and frontier communities which we've been asked to work.
I'm going to yield the remainder of my time at this point to Mr. Fortenberry, and I will come back after Ms. McCollum with one more question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lips, let's talk about the I think it's 6.8% error rate that has been mentioned in the program, improper payment rate, either those receiving too much or those not receiving enough. So, okay, I'm going to make you a deal, and I'm sorry Ms. Pingree is gone, because I think she'd like this. Why don't you get that error rate down from 7 to 5, recognizing any program is going to have some error, some slippage. You're dealing with states and human contingencies and on and on. You get it from 7 to 5, about a third reduction, and we'll take that 1/3 and move it into the farm-to-school program, which is about $1.2 billion, by the way. So the total error rate problem translates into over $4 billion. So will you take that deal?
I don't have authority to agree to that, Mr. Fortenberry, but I like it.
Okay.
I will say that.
But here's the goal. Obviously, this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but the goal is nobody wants to waste money. Nobody wants to see people cheating the system. To the degree that we can reduce that error, you actually empower other programs that are producing significantly good results, farm to school being one of them. Let me turn back, though, to the issue of dietary guidelines, which we touched on a moment ago. So these began in 1980, and there is a correlation to increasing obesity rates that began at the same time. Now, it's probably a lot of complex variables in there, so you can't blame it exclusively on the dietary guidelines. But what type of correlation do you see? In 1980, we saw obesity at rates of 15%, and for adults, 5% for children. Now it's staggering 40% for adults and 19% for youth. What do you attribute that to?
This is always an important part of the discussion with regard to the science, Mr. Fortenberry, is correlation versus causation, and it's an important issue that we have to continue and look at and discuss. What you stated about dietary guidelines is true. What we also know is that most Americans don't abide by the dietary guidelines. I think the agency has a lot of work to do on that front. We've started some different initiatives called Start Simple, just trying to get Americans to do a few things. We make them too complex and they ignore them. So there's much work to be done across that front. We want to make sure that the science is analyzed in an open, transparent way and that all science is considered and they're making recommendations based on the whole of the science and not the headline of the day, which is what we talked about earlier. So it's an important issue and we'll continue to look at that.
Well, I think it begs the question as to how much authority you now have in the space, because you've been subsumed into the information age where there's so much competing dynamics. Yeah, a new study will come out by a new institute almost on a daily basis that says something that contradicts prevailing thought processes. So how do you reposition yourself in terms of being the authoritative guideline and have the humility to be continuously self-reflective to make sure that we aren't making some error here and that we aren't part of the causation with some dietary guideline that is maybe partially misinformed?
Right, and you know, there is suggestion that that's the case, and we should review that carefully. I think with regard to people trusting what the government has to say in this space, the process has to be open, transparent, inclusive, and based on science. And when we set out in this process, that's what USDA set out to do. I think that's what they set out to do last time. There was a lot of concerns about that. So we're doing everything we can to increase transparency and opportunity for input in the process to make sure that everybody sees that sausage as it's made. And one of the things that the secretaries, this is not just USDA, it's HHS, but are committed to, we talked about at the beginning, is that if the government is not sure, that we ought not to speak. And so we need to make sure that when we're looking at the science that we're speaking on those things of which we have great data to show that that may affect health or not, and then we're not moving back and forth with the headline of the day when the government speaks.
Well, I think it's a good news and bad news story. I think there's a growing awareness of this problem, again, of food and health relationship. I think there's a growing awareness, again, of the word wellness has been fully incorporated into most vocabularies. People are very much aware that the stressful dynamics of our overbusyness and scheduling are taking us away from what used to be traditional times for meals and socialization around meals. And yet, at the same time, interestingly, the market dynamics that drove that problem are driving it back as people are looking for, again, places that serve quality, fresh food, particularly in restaurants, at affordable prices. But this is changing in terms of the grocery dynamics as well. So there's some good news on this front, but I'm fearful that, again, the government has lost a certain amount of authority in this regard, that, again, the dynamics of too much information being out there confuse it, combined with the modern life has put increasing pressure on people and is resulting in this health decline. So if I know it's a considered part of your agency to look at this, but I do worry that in the midst of all of this chaos and turmoil and information overflow, you've lost authority in this regard.
I think that you're right to have some concern on that front. Again, we want to make sure that folks know what's happening in the process, and then we got to talk about how we talk to people about that. It's the same as farm to school.
Yes.
You know, anecdotally, we can change kids by participating them in the process of the food.
Thank you, Mr. Lips. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. McCollum?
Thank you, and thank you for bringing up the summer challenge that children have with nutrition, Mr. Chair. I want to take this a step farther. We have weekends sometimes where we know children are facing food insecurity. We have 3-day, 4-day weekends. Then we have winter break, we have spring break, and then we have the summer. If I have had the opportunity to go out and be at some of the schools that are doing some of the feeding programs, but those are for children sometimes who can find a way to get to the summer school program to even participate because there's lack of transportation and families being able to get their children there and then work out the flexibility of daycare for the rest of the day. And the amount of food that's served is limited as to what the school's going to be able to prepare because they're running on a skeleton staff. What are the real discussions that are taking place behind the scenes over in the department? Is this just like, well, if the kids are in school, we're going to do this, or are we really having a conversation, a serious conversation about the lack of nutrition that these children are basically going without, which means they'll eat something that will fill them. And I'm not going to mention any brand names and get somebody in trouble. But, drinking something, eating something that many people would call junk food becomes something that's just filling and gets them through the day. What is really happening? Because our school districts, we can't put this all on the schools, and that's what's happening. Our schools are being tasked to do more and more and criticized for not delivering, a utopia. What are we doing? What is the USDA doing to really address childhood nutrition and hunger in this country?
Sure, Representative. This is one of the more complicated issues that deserves a lot of discussion as child nutrition reauthorization comes forward. As you know, that expired in 2016, and it's one of the pivotal issues that need to be looked at. There are a number of programs out there to serve children, certainly the school meals programs. Child and Adult Care Food Program operates after school, sometimes summer programs. There's summer feeding. We don't have authority to run weekend programs, so you may know a lot of nonprofit volunteers, food banks, et cetera, are running backpack programs on weekends, those type of things. We have authority to run holidays, but not weekends or these breaks. And so that is a very important issue. And as I do, you talk to teachers and they talk about kids coming back on Monday having had that gap in the middle. It's an important issue. We don't have authority to solve that issue at USDA, but as we're looking at how we provide food across these fronts, I think it's extremely important. And as I talked about with, we continue to test these methodologies on how to get food to the kids. The congregate sites work very well in some places. I've seen them work very well citywide. They run buses in the summer to get all the kids there, but you get outside those city limits and those kids don't have access and the parents can't get them there. So we're continuing to innovate on that front to provide information to Congress as they consider that. But certainly hunger outside of school is an issue that's complicated to solve and one we need to continue to engage on.
Thank you. Mr. Lips, yesterday we received notification that FNS approved a demonstration waiver for the Kentucky Department of Community-Based Services. The waiver allows for the privatization of core SNAP functions that are currently administered by civil servants. I think it will come as a shock to some of my colleagues that vital responsibilities such as conducting SNAP eligibility interviews, application assistance, and application submission will be contracted out to private for-profit companies. I understand this waiver is limited to just one county, but we already have examples from Texas and Indiana where the privatization of these services ultimately hurt people and households that were seeking SNAP. In Texas, for example, applicants waited longer than the required 30-day eligibility determination. In both cases, it's my understanding that the states ultimately stopped these experiments. Shifting services from public to private contractors shifts the incentives and it eliminates program expertise. Now, the Kentucky Department of Community-Based Services requested the waiver in part to improve customer service. Is that a failure on the part of the Food and Nutrition Service, what can FNS do to help state agencies improve their customer service so that they don't have to resort to this extreme remedy of contracting out? And can this be terminated before 24 months if it's not working appropriately?
Mr. Chairman, we're working to ensure that we have all appropriate oversight measures in place to ensure that this is working. Certainly, if it's showing a negative effect on recipients in earlier time, we will do everything necessary to ensure that the recipients are protected and receive their benefits moving forward. What Kentucky is asking to do are things that Congress has allowed them to do in many of the other low-income programs, and I hear continually when I'm out from various different states about the difficulty in trying to administer these programs when they're allowed to use one type of contractor in one situation and not in another. And some of that's on situations as simple as a SNAP recipient calling into a state call center and not being able to get basic information on their SNAP case or the status of their application. So that's step one of that. This waiver does allow Kentucky to go a little bit further with that same staff conducting the interview on SNAP that they're conducting across other programs. A similar type of waiver has been operated in 4 other states for quite some time successfully. With nonprofits, you note that this is a for-profit. This state, Kentucky, believes that they can provide better service to the recipient on this front. It's been a long time since some other states failed on similar but different measures, and we think it's important that states have the opportunity to see if they can serve recipients better. The waiver is limited to 1 county. FNS is providing extensive technical assistance and oversight on this and has 2 on-the-ground visits planned as soon as the pilot launches, and we will keep you all advised on those.
Thank you, Mr. Lips. Okay. Thank you so much for being here today. The Food and Nutrition Service has an enormous responsibility for administering our nation's nutrition programs. I appreciate your taking time to hear our concerns and to answer our questions. We'll forward any additional questions that we may have for the record, and we appreciate your diligence in getting responses to us in a timely manner. Again, thank you for continuing to work with us, and we look forward to continuing your mission in providing safe and nutritious food to the American people. With that, the subcommittee is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.